Thank you to all the members for supporting my channel. Alright, it has been a week. If you haven't yet played the Genshin Impact version 4.2 story quest, I highly suggest you back off of this video and come back later. If you haven't done Furina's story quest, I highly suggest you back off and come back later. This video will contain spoilers to both the Furina and the main quest line. However, I will not be spoiling most of anything else in the game unless it is minorly relevant, but that is the main issue here. It is a very minor relevance. Mandatory disclaimer out of the way. I just want to go ahead and say that, my fucking god, Furina is easily one of the most well-written characters in the whole story. And let me pretext that by saying, I am not a story person. When I play Genshin Impact, or really any game in general, I see the story as a set piece that gets me where I need to go. The story is the glue that ties combat sequences together and gives me a motive for doing everything I do, but when I go to play a video game, I'm not necessarily looking for a good story. That being said, if I do see a good story and I have massive enjoyment from it, I love it. I am all over that shit, but it is very rare. And it's because of that rarity that when I see a story that I really like, that hits way harder than it has any right to. And when that hit comes out of a gacha game that you've played for 3 years and you've been so mind-numbingly boggled down by all of the shit story, it hits so much harder. For those of you that haven't realized, I'm talking about the Fontaine story that came out in Genshin 4.0 to 4.2, also known as the Fontaine story, which currently holds my personal opinion of the best storyline in Genshin by a mile. And that's not saying that the other stories that have come out in Genshin have been bad. You know, the Mondstadt arc was alright, the Liyue arc was pretty good, the Inazuma arc was and then the Sumeru arc was, I would say, like a tier or two above Liyue. But the Fontaine arc, dude, it just blows the dick off of everything else in the story. And it's just... Okay, look. Fuck the formatting to this video. You know, I have this whole script written down here where I just want to talk about everything, but like, there's no way in hell I'm gonna actually be able to talk about everything I want to talk about that's so good about the story, so fuck the script, I'm just gonna go free ball here, alright? So prepare to hear me rant about the things I really like about the story. First things first, the minor details in the Fontaine story quest really make it work, alright? One thing, a big complaint I have about a lot of Genshin story is a lot of it is kind of spoon-fed to you, really. Like, there's a lot of characters in the game that just kind of exist for the sole purpose of being an exposition dump. Primary example, you know, Paimon. You know, everybody hates Paimon, not because she's whatever, you know, she's annoying, but the main reason why people don't like Paimon is because she solely exists to lore dump things that a character just said 30 seconds ago. And it's become such a, like, bottleneck trope for the game where, oh, you know, did you catch that, traveler? Here, let me repeat what this guy just said so you don't miss it. And Fontaine doesn't really do that. And it feels like in Fontaine, Paimon more so acts like a character that talks to be in place of the traveler. A primary example, the courtroom. Alright, now they would typically have the traveler talk in the first 2 courts, but instead of having the traveler talk, they have Paimon talk for the traveler, because the traveler herself is typically seen as a mute character. We'll get into that later. But for this scene, they have Paimon just say one thing as her own character for the traveler, and that's that. But in other quests, like the Liyue questline and the Inazuma questline, what'll really end up happening is a character will say, hey, we need to go to Pompeii and visit the top of the volcano before it erupts and throw in a gemstone, and then Paimon will be like, you hear that, traveler? We need to go to Pompeii and we need to go throw a gemstone in the volcano. And it's just, she just repeats everything that everybody else says. But in this quest line, they don't really do that. And there's a lot of minor details that kind of just pop up and they don't really get mentioned, and they have massive lore important reasons later on. Like, for example, the Indemnitium, which is mentioned at the blacksmith where you first meet Tartaglia. It is such a, like, offhanded, one-time mention thing that, like, oh yeah, you know, we are the blacksmith, we work with Indemnitium, and then Paimon's like, oh, well, you know, where's all this Indemnitium coming from? And they explain, like, oh, it's coming from the Opera Epiclase, and, you know, we're bringing it in from here. But then that kind of, like, leaves the question open of, like, okay, well, how was Indemnitium made? They don't ever answer that question, and Paimon doesn't repeat it. So it doesn't really stick with you that much. And then later on, in retrospect, when you finish the quest, it'd be like, holy fucking, holy damn, like that's where it was all going. And there's another character, Wriothesley, also on the topic of Indemnitium. Wriothesley has a conversation point where he's like, yeah, all the Indemnitium is coming from this place right here, and we are making this big boat, and you're like, oh, well, that's where all the Indemnitium is going. But then not really, because it turns out that's only 4% of the Indemnitium, because we're told that, oh yeah, Indemnitium is made in the Opera Epic and it's brought out, and then, a character makes something with it, and that's it. That's all we're told, but we're also mentioned that, like, oh yeah, Indemnitium is missing, and we see this huge ship that Wriothesley's building in the prison complex, and it's just like, okay, well, that's where it's going. Nope. Turns out, in the very end, Focalors was taking the Indemnitium, 96% of all the Indemnitium ever made, and it was being used to power a massive guillotine to slay a god. And, like, again, Indemnitium itself is such a minor detail that's kind of thrown out there. Another great example, Furina. Furina has a dialogue bit where he's like, oh yeah, the rain. Oh, it's raining. Oh, Hydro Dragon, please don't cry. And it doesn't stop raining. And Paimon doesn't repeat it, because again, she kind of exists as like a narrative piece to repeat, story. And they don't do that here. So then later on in the story quest, what will happen is like, oh, Neuvillette goes to visit Navia's father's grave, and it's kind of mentioned earlier in the story that on the day that he died, it rained. So when Neuvillette goes to the grave and it starts raining, it's kind of like, wait a minute, that's weird. Why is it raining? And then what'll end up happening is Navia and Neuvillette will start to talk, and then it just stops. But it's not really brought up by anybody. You're kind of just meant to put the pieces together that, oh my god, he's the Hydro Dragon. So anybody who paid attention to the story, things start to stick out that it's like, oh, what's the deal with that? What's the deal with this? A really good example, I knew that Focalors and Furina were not the same person. Okay, well, scratch that. I knew Furina wasn't who she said she was, and my reasoning had nothing to do. I didn't think, oh my god, Focalors has actually detached herself from Furina. I didn't think that. But there was enough breadcrumbs left around by the game for you to be able to put the pieces together. I don't know. Something ain't right over there. For example, I talked about this on livestream a long time ago, but when Furina first came out in the story, I thought it was very weird that Furina flipped just on a dime. Just as soon as people didn't really like what she was doing, she instantly flip-flops to something else, and that made me think that Furina, or the Furina that we see, isn't the real one. And I don't mean oh my god, there's another god. I more so meant that I thought that what Furina was doing was an act, and there was enough breadcrumbs around the story to prove that right without explicitly telling you that. And I love that narrative foreshadowing that's all throughout the story. In the very first quest line, they show you, hey, this is Indemnitium, this is how it works, this is where we get it, but there's this problem. They don't tell you an answer, they don't tell you anything. That's just enough to leave it open, and then you're like, okay, Tartaglia now. Another thing, Furina and her conversation with the people. Here's this, it's open, figure it out. Well, we don't have enough information to put pieces together, we just know what the people of Fontaine know, which is another thing that I love about the story. I love that we feel like people in the story. Think about every other quest line in Genshin. We, as the character, typically know the overarching situation. In the Mondstadt arc, we knew the problem was an Abyss Mage. Had it been just Dvalin going on a rampage, whatever. But we as a player knew that the real problem was the Abyss controlling the dragon. In Inazuma, we knew that there were two Shoguns, because we got brought into the Shogun world during the Toma fight, so we knew that the Raiden we saw was not the real Raiden, while nobody else knew that, so we were kind of playing as a player character instead of the main character. In the Liyue questline, we knew that Rax Lapis might not have died, because we as a player saw Zhongli, and anybody with common sense is just oh, that's the Archon. So we knew that he wasn't really dead, or you're just told by somebody else. And then in Sumeru, we knew Nahida was the Danger Archon, and we knew that the real situation was being proctored by the heads of the what is it called? The Academia. And we knew that the Doctor was the real, catalyst behind everything. But in Sumeru, I'm sorry, in Fontaine, we knew as much as the characters knew. We only knew what the game told us, and there wasn't enough narrative clues left around to kind of piece together everything else. Like, we had enough pieces to get a general understanding of, like, something's wrong here, but we didn't have enough to come to a conclusion. And I really like that. I really like that they kept players in the dark for a very long time. Now, that would be a different thing if the payoff wasn't good, and the payoff was fucking amazing, alright? Again, spoilers, I know I spoiled a lot up until this point, but, like, if you've made it this far, and you haven't finished the story quest, do it, because it is such, you're doing yourself a disservice, especially if you watching this and you like Genshin. Like, this story is fucking fire. So, basically, what ends up happening is they go to this Epiclace, the Opera Epiclace, and they put Furina on trial. Because again, as I said earlier, there's enough kind of lore bits around to realize that, okay, Furina isn't necessarily what she seems, and there's enough characters in the show that are in the game that kind of like give you puzzle pieces, like Arlecchino. That's another good example. The interaction between Arlecchino and Furina is such a good example of like they're leaving breadcrumbs. For example, the first interaction with Furina, your character raises the sword at Furina and she gets scared. Why would she get scared? She's an Archon. Archons are powerful. Even the weakest one, which is supposedly Venti, which we already knew Venti was the weakest Archon. Why would Furina get scared of Traveler when Venti could probably put up a good fight? It doesn't make any sense. Arlecchino has a talk with Furina, and Arlecchino's like, I don't think that's the real Archon. That girl's cursed, or something like that. That gives you enough reason to suspect that, oh, she might not actually be a god. And then you go to the trial, and it just like, holy shit, like she straight up isn't a god. Why? Why isn't she a god? Now we need the answer. So you, as a player, can get invested into that trial. And then when it's deemed that she's guilty, it's like, oh, I sentenced the Archon to death. And it's like, wait a minute, the Archon? You mean Furina? That doesn't make any sense. Furina's not... And then the fucking, the Opera Epiclace blows up, and the fucking, I'm sorry, what is it called? The Mechanise Cardinal, or whatever the fuck it is. The big thing in the background blows up, and you get taken to that alternate world, and it turns out that Focalors made Oceanids into human, and that's what the original sin is. Oh my god, and the Primordial Water. The Primordial Water is something that is kind of like all throughout Fontaine, that's kind of sparked in and out, but it's never really implied what the true importance is until that moment. Didn't matter how much you looked into the lore, nobody knew what the real primordial water was. Only Focalors did. And we, as the players, figure out when we meet Focalors, she tells us essentially like, yeah, by the way, my counterpart was the original Hydra Archon. She turned Oceanids into humans, and those humans were branded with original sin. Now she's dead, and I'm here. And just to make sure that my people are protected, I am plotting to trick Conria to kill myself to return power to the original Dragon Sovereign so that he may protect the people. And that is so fucking cool. And that's another thing. This is like such a minor detail that I also want to bring up. That we see the Opera Epiclace a lot. Like, it is a massive, important role to the story. And just out of sheer whim one day, I made the offhanded comment that I thought the back of the opera looked like a guillotine. That one little note that I made about the story turned out to actually be lore important, because the Opera Epiclace is essentially a big guillotine that will execute the old Archon and make sure that the Dragon Sovereign can reclaim his power. And that is such a nice little narrative touch. And again, like, I love that we don't know that. Like, we in every other region, we have come in as a traveler with the prospect of us as the players knowing what's going to happen. But in this region, the community kind of found out everything around the same time. Now, there are a few people, with crackheads conspiracy theories about what was going to happen, but most of the people that knew what was going to happen either A, saw leaks, or B, they just kind of looked at the theory, but nobody knew for sure unless they saw the leaks. And that's cool. I really like that. And again, I love how Focalors, not Furina, Focalors, her whole plan was to usurp a nation that has been just out throughout the whole time, just an absolute fucking cockhole. I'm talking about Celestia, by the way. And In order to do that, she tricks a dragon sovereign into liking the people for 500 years so she can collect indemnitium to execute herself. And then at the end, oh my god, Furina. Like, it is revealed to us that Furina as a character is one of the most just caring archons of all time. Like, don't get me wrong. Nahida has done a lot for her people, and she loves her people. She's one of the most helpful archon, but Furina herself has gone through so much. Furina is a human modeled after Focalors to be the ideal marker of humanity, complete with compassion and the ability to understand humanity. However, when Furina was crafted, she was made to not be able to understand the order of the gods, a purpose design flaw so that she could be the perfect human, the perfect idea of humanity. And unfortunately, she was tasked with playing the role of God. Now, I'm sure some of you are like, oh, well, how could she do that? Well, she's a human. She's a human, and she understands what a human thinks a god is, so all she has to do is pretend to be that. And that has such massive lore relevance, especially because Arlentino even kind of, you know, she preludes it. She's just like, I have spent enough time around the gods to know how real gods act and how real gods operate, and that is not a god. So it's heavily implied that she just doesn't really know. Anybody that actually has any understanding of godlyhood could see that. But because most people don't, and most people, especially in Fontaine, only see Furina, they only think Furina is what a god should be, and that is amazing. But again, like going back to Furina and like how she herself experiences the world, Furina as a character spent 500 years trying to stop a godly prophecy with human knowledge, and to everybody else that seems like nothing. But for Furina, that's all she could do, because she can't understand the act of God. So she's sitting there, you know, measuring rainwater and seeing if the water levels are rising, because that's what a human would do. She's trying to apply logic for 500 years, and she does this every single day from the day she's born to the day she gets to the end of her life, and it's just stressful for her. And there's a point when she gets given this role, and Focalors does not try to hide it. Focalors straight up tells Furina that, hey, you will suffer. You will struggle. Your life will not be easy. And Focalors says that if we were to put the suffering of me and the suffering of all of Fontaine's people on a scale, I would be outweighed. And I think that's so nice, because it just shows that she really does care about her people, and she believes in fulfilling this role. But her suffering actually is greater than everybody's put together, and here's how we know. So we're told through lore that the fountain in the middle of the Fontaine is the accumulation of all emotion. So if you don't know, the fountain that you donate your hydro sigils to is said in lore to be the accumulation of all emotions in Fontaine. All waters of Fontaine lead up back to that pool. And because it is a harbinger of emotions, specifically powerful emotions can be felt. That's why when the Vache arc, when the three girls are killed, we hear them, because their emotion was stronger than everything else. But if you complete that arc, and you finish it, and you go back, and after the 4.0 second quest, go to that fountain, turn down your in-game audio to 0, or turn up your in-game audio, turn down your music, turn down your background noise, your sound effects, just dialogue on max, and stand in the middle of the fountain and listen, and you'll hear Furina crying. And the thing she said, she's like, oh, how interminable, how much longer, or something like that. And you see in the, end of the quest, in the final, bracket of the quest, Furina says that while crying, which means that in that moment, when you hear that, that is happening in real time. And that her emotions and her struggle is so great that it not only overwhelms everything else in the fountain, it is hearable. Which is fucking crazy, because that is such a small detail that so many people could miss, and it's still there, and I love that. And another detail that it's very obvious, but a lot of people will see it, but I still like it. There's a scene, so when you start showing her backstory, it shows it in scenes like an opera, and it's like, oh, scene 1, and it's her going up to the mirror, and she stands in front of it, and it's just like, oh, that's nice, but then it goes like scene 200, and it's like her, doing her inaugural speech, and then like scene 1,000, and then like scene 15,000, and scene 18,000, and then scene 180,000. And scene 180,000 is her talking to like a woman. And it's also shown that she like has great compassion for her people. Like there was a boy who was sick and couldn't attend one of her shows, so she went to the boy's house and gave him a performance so that he could see it because he was sick, because she cares about her people. She has humanity because she's a human. And she is sitting in her throne. She's talking to her people. She has meetings with people, and Furina is smiling and she's talking, and she starts to cry. And the person she's talking to is like, Furina, are you crying? And it pans up and she's just bawling with a full smile on her face, and she doesn't even notice because she has been like this for so long that that struggle is just normal to her. And then she goes home that night, and that night is when she has that crying fit, and you hear it in the fountain. So, like, even though she says that, my struggle wouldn't outweigh the scales, it literally does. But she doesn't care, because she does it for her people, and it's so nice. Like, depressing things in video games, especially in story, like, if you do it a lot, it loses its weight. But it happens so rarely in Genshin, and when it does happen, it happens so well, at least in the story. In the lore, that's a different tale altogether. But in the story, it's so rare. To see stuff like this happen, it's just so nice. Like, it paints a very good picture of, like, the things Furina has been through and the awful people it's just good. Like, I can't, I'm babbling at this point because it's just so fucking good. Like, easily the best quest in Genshin. One of the best quests I've seen in a video game, because it actually made me emotional. I know, believe it or not, I can cry. Sullivan can cry. After the cutscene with Focalors and Neuvillette, I had to put down my controller, take off my glasses, and just take the time to recollect myself. And that's the mark of a good story. Like, if a story makes you feel strong emotions, good story. Amazing story. Fucking hats off to the developers for making such an amazing story. But I have some problems, okay? And it's a very minor one. The jail sections, 95% of that can be cut out, and the story would be the same, alright? Cut out all of the, like, bullshit with the other people, like the questions and solving the mysteries. Cut all that shit out. Cut out most of the interactions with Lenny. Cut all that shit out. Establish a connection with Risley, Saijouin, and figure out about the boat. And that's it. Like, and you could, Tartaglia could dream. That could have happened anywhere. Like, the dream with the vision, that could have happened anywhere. It didn't have to specifically happen in the prison. The prison arc is like a wart on a very pretty woman's face, but goddamn, like, it is such a small wart on such an overwhelmingly beautiful face. I'm willing to forgive it, but that's my only complaint. Remove that, and it's good. It's great. Overall, story's fucking amazing. If you watched this video and you haven't done the story yet, you're fucking up. Unless you wanted to hear my opinion on it, and I'm very negative about Genshin. I shit on Genshin all the time. This story was fucking amazing. Like, 10 out of 10, awesome story. A 9.5 out of 10, Jail section was a little lame. Story is great. I fucking loved it. I wanted to rant about this for a week, and I had to hold off because, so many people haven't done it. I didn't want to spoil it for anybody, but yeah, I loved it. If you like the video, like. If you dislike it, dislike it. If you're like me, go and subscribe. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that's about it. Please allow me to take this time to thank my channel members, alright? Akira, Beals, Tina, Arfura, Daito, Adam, Kabanozi, High Pity, Jet Kirby, Davey Halverson, Zelemental Supreme, Darkoth, Crystal, Cat Food Tastes Good, Demomatic, Shrutdark. Thank you all for supporting the channel. Thank you for supporting the content I create. Next video should be a little bit bigger, but until then, I'll see you later. Stay safe, and peace.